Can speak. Hello, good evening, everyone. My name is Omono Okonkwo, and I'm opening this event tonight. Please, I'd like everyone at the forward. We have empty chairs in front, if you don't mind. Hello. Don't make me call out your names, though. Please, let's head to the front. If you're behind, we have empty chairs in front. Hello, ma'am. Please, head to the front. Thank you. So we can start. Thank you very much. So I'd like to welcome everyone, all our invited guests and panelists to the 91st edition of the Power Dialogue. So for tonight, we will be talking about COP28, keeping the 1.5 degrees Celsius commitment in Nigeria. So, and this topic is going to address Nigeria's participation at COP28 in 2023. We will also identify limitations and opportunities in meeting Nigeria's climate commitments. And we will also discuss the roles of stakeholders and the government in achieving Nigeria's contribution to the climate agreement. Now, to discuss this very exciting topic tonight, I'd like to introduce our panelists. First off, we have Emeka Okpukpara, who is currently the partner at Nextia Power, the Nextia Group, where he leads a team focused on solving the power challenges in Africa's power sector. Please put your hands together for him as he heads to the stage. Welcome, sir. And then we have Michael Ivenso, the Director of Energy, Transportation, and Infrastructure at the National Council on Climate Change. Prior to this time, he was the Climate Change and Environmental, Social, and Governance Advisor in Washington, D.C. He has an executive certification in public policy. Yeah, that's him. Climate Change, Politics, and Economics from Harvard Kennedy School. He served in the Anambra State government for 7 years and 5 months. You're welcome, sir. Please, a round of applause for him. And we have Lucky Abeng. He's the research lead at Climate Justice, Commonwealth Youth Climate Change Network. Lucky Abeng is an enthusiastic sustainable development practitioner and an environment and climate justice campaigner with over 4 years of experience working in the environment and development sector. You're very welcome, sir. Yeah, please, a round of applause for him. And last but not the least, we have Zainab Dati. She is the project manager, energy sector portfolio at the French Development Agency, otherwise known as AFD, with over a decade of experience in climate finance in Nigeria through implemented and managed multi-million euro portfolios of sustainable energy projects at organizations like AFD, GIZ, and ECN. Zainab's expertise lies in identifying, developing, and implementing renewable energy projects, promoting energy efficiency, and unlocking climate finance at local levels. Please, a round of applause for her. So before I hand over to Emeka Okpukpara to let you know that there is a restroom just to the end of the room, if you need to use that. And also we are passing out a paper with a QR code. It's for our audience polls. So please use your cell phones to scan the QR code, and then you see a list of questions. You can answer the questions for us. It's relating to the topic and also the power sector. Thank you very much. Enjoy your evening.
Thank you, Amana. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. When we think about COP28, we think about a few things as Nigerians. There were 1,400 Nigerian delegates at COP. Interestingly enough, that was 2% of the delegates at COP. And we have 4,000 megawatts. Fantastic. But I thought COP was a very important event for the country because there's about $300 million worth of pledges that were made towards our energy poverty. But I also think from a global point of view, it was really impressive to see how the country, the Nigerian pavilion, thanks to the NCCC, was packed day in and day out with the different events and different things that really promoted the country, and we'll hope to see some of those fruits come into play. But I would like to have the panelists spend a few minutes speaking about the experience with COP and what it meant for Nigeria. So maybe we'll start with you, Zainab, and we'll go to Michael and then to Lucky. Zainab, over to you.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for coming. Even though I didn't go to COP, for myself, I think looking at, it was important because yes, Nigeria was able to close some deals, being there to have access to some investors that maybe otherwise would have required a lot more effort to have access to them or to even see what they're willing to offer, because that was also another thing you're able to get at COP. So it was really beneficial for us to be there to show our seriousness. And let's be honest, also, I was also glad to hear the president talk about the fact that transition has to be just, that we have to consider that it cannot just be one size fits all. What they're doing in developed countries or even some other developing countries does not necessarily have to translate to what Nigeria needs to do to transition, lower emissions, and you know, I don't want to say commit to COP, but yeah, commit to COP as the agreement that was signed based on the NDCs. But for me, it was important for us to see that, you know, climate change isn't fair. Yes, we know that. It doesn't care where it's produced. It doesn't care what activities cause it, but it does affect us. However, we still do require energy access. We are energy poor, and that is still has to be done in a sustainable way to make sure we not only align with our NDCs, but also make sure it doesn't affect our development. Yep.
Thank you and good evening. Thanks for having us again. Really, COP28 was a watershed moment for Nigeria for so many reasons. For the first time, the private sector was represented. They were in the majority of the participation from Nigeria. And contrary to, like Emeka said, what you've heard in the media, and if with 2% representation in terms of absolute population compared to the rest of the world, we were underrepresented. But the truth is, for the first time, the private sector was well represented. We had about 70% of the people from outside of government attending from Nigeria. And what that means essentially is that we've said as a matter of policy in this country that the energy transition is going to be largely driven by the private sector. And for that reason, the conversations around climate happening elsewhere becomes really important in helping to amplify what we have been talking about domestically. So when you have a private sector interacting with their peers from the rest of the world, and they are hearing the things we are telling them here, then it becomes real. They better appreciate the urgency. They better appreciate both the geopolitical pressures as well as the regulatory pressures, and more importantly, the economic pressures that actually speaks to their bottom line and the reasons why they have to transition to a low carbon economy, to low carbon operations. How do we reskill your employees in the spirit of just transition, like Zainab mentioned, to take up skills and capabilities in areas that are important in helping to enable that just transition? How do you retool your assembly lines, your manufacturing plants to be a lot more energy efficient, and so forth and so on? These become, kitchen table conversations, right? And what better way to have that conversation when you are present amongst your peers globally, talking about them, rather than what Michael and his DG and his colleagues said in the NCCC, right? So validating those narratives really becomes important. And what we brought back from COP28 in terms of the engagements we had with our partners across the world, lessons learned, and deals that were signed. Solarge and InfraCorp signed a deal to establish PV manufacturing right here in Nigeria. What can be more transformational? The likes of Dangote and BUA and Mr. Lumelu were all there, looking at how to interact with the rest of the world, talking about sustainability-linked financing for enabling this transition we're talking about. So, so for me, largely, bringing the private sector to COP, engaging them in conversations with their peers across the world really was a tectonic moment. And for us, I think it represents a very important progress in our journey to net zero. We'll talk about that more as we make progress.
Thank you, Michael. Lucky, over to you.
Okay, good evening, friends, colleagues. Thank you to the organizers of today's session for having us. Yes, I would wear the cap of civil society on this panel today. And for those of us who tried as much as possible to attend COP, there were challenges. We saw the challenge of accreditation. And let me say kudos to the government of Nigeria through the NCCC. We're beginning to see what collaboration looks like. There are a lot of people who got accreditation through the government because civil society organizations were given either 1 slot or 2 slots for COP28. And I think that is an attack on civil society's participation at the global level conversation. So I attended COP with a badge from the government. That was the first partnership, which was really good. And for me, my interest at COP28 was to follow the first GST that we had this year, and also to follow the conversation on adaptation. So we saw some wins that were not too I watched it down from here. There were some things on the global goal on adaptation. We saw a review on the GST as well. Even though we had a low representation of young people compared to what we had in Sharm el-Sheikh, COP27. And also the much talked about loss and damage fund that we're going to be delving into as well on this conversation today. So in a nutshell, of course, the conversation that we can no longer depend on fossil fuel. We have to transition, but in a just way. It's also one of the conversations and outcome that was on the front burner for me at COP28. I'm here for us to share the experiences, and I'm happy we're already having a dive into what the outcome of COP28 and its implication for Nigeria would look like. So let's have an amazing conversation tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Lucky. So speaking from a climate justice point of view, talk to us about the current Africa status on the loss and damage fund, because there was obviously something that was discussed at COP28. Could you tell us, was any progress made, and where do we go from here?
Yes, thank you very much on that question. If for those that have been following the conversation, you will see that the loss and damage fund was being pushed by the African group of negotiators from COP27. As a matter of fact, that was one of the important wins and agreement at COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh for the establishment of a loss and damage fund. Then on the first day of COP28 in Dubai, COP world leaders agreed to the establishment of an L&D fund. But I think, like I said, I'll be speaking with the cap of the civil society tonight. I am one of those who attended COP28 and wasn't overly excited about the loss and damage fund that was agreed, or a little bit, $703 million was agreed by leaders to that particular fund. But just like climate justice, we are saying that 703 million will not be enough to go around if it is to go to Africa alone. But this is a fund that would go to everyone. And when you place it side by side with the profit that's been made by those who are responsible for the climate change that we are experiencing today, noting that Africa alone, we emit a little bit above 5%. So the remaining 95% is from the Annex 1 countries that we have, and then we are getting $703 million committed to a fund. It doesn't really speak to our demands of climate justice. Remember, we have the polluter pay principles in the Paris Agreement as well. So there are lots of questions that are being raised to climate justice. Does the loss and damage fund respond to our demand for climate justice? And you know the chant by young people, what do we want? Climate justice. And when do we want it? We want it now. And if we can't get it, you shut it down. What are we shutting down? We are shutting down those entities that are responsible for climate change. But of course, when you look at the conversation, I'm a Nigerian, even though climate justice is a conversation that is on the global stage. I'm a Nigerian, and also we need to start having these conversations of climate justice with the realities on ground. I've always maintained a position that if we're speaking about just transition, we have to transition at our own pace. And I think government will also agree with me that we also need to use whatever resources we have to transition. But it's a win for us when you talk about the loss and damage fund, because this is the first time that fund was actually pushed by the African group of negotiators. So this is the first time that we are speaking as one voice and then getting a result, knowing fully well that one of our priorities in the last 5 years at the COP has been for Africa to be considered as a continent of special needs and circumstances, meaning that we cannot be on the same level of implementation with countries like the US or Russia or China or Germany, as the case may be. But for the loss and damage fund, for some persons, it's a win. For some other persons, like myself, it's a 40% win that I think we can get to 60 or 80%. 703 million is not just going to be enough. We've not agreed on what constitutes losses, what constitutes damage. And just like climate finance, that we are still debating what definition we would have for climate finance, which has been one of the reasons why the $100 billion from the COP15 Paris Agreement is still a question. At the GST, they said, no, at COP26, it was said that the Annex 1 countries have delivered on the 100 billion. And then questions from the Global South are saying, where is the evidence that the 100 billion has been delivered? And now, just at the GST as well, like I mentioned, which was one of my priorities at COP28, it was agreed that the breakdown of the 100 billion will be given as the next SBs, SB60s in Germany that will be coming up. Then you will see the breakdown of how the 100 billion have been shared and all of that. So we're waiting for those conversations. But in the meantime, we have something to run with, which is the 703 billion that have been committed to the loss and damage fund. So we would keep our pressure on for climate justice, and for us, it will be to meet most of our demands. I think I'll stop here for now.
Thank you, Lucky. Michael, I'm going to come to you from an education point of view. What does the loss and damage fund mean for the average Nigerian? Because we hear these words being thrown around, but what's the actual meaning of the loss and damage fund?
So the loss and damage fund, as it was constituted in COP28, really is a step forward for over 20 years of conversation between the global north and the rest of the world in terms of, like Lucky said, you have been responsible for where we are today. And that commitment hasn't been forthcoming. If anything else, they've been grandstanding. And so if Lucky says we're 40%, I think going from 0 to 750 billion is a monumental shift where we are. I'm a kind of a glass half full kind of person. It may not be enough, but it's significantly different from where we used to be. That conversation has been 20 years in the making, and they've been delinquent about it year after year, commitment after commitment. But then again, who says they're all pledges? They're largely pledges. Who said they're going to put the money down, right? And so let's be cautious about and be overly optimistic about the use and the operationalizing of that fund. My advice, my take is let's look inwards, right? The global north have no serious interest in making you better. It's a case of, charity begins at home. We have to decide for ourselves how we are going to participate, outside of the fund. And therefore, there are opportunities for us as a country to reimagine how we utilize our natural resources, right? So we know that fossil fuel has been fingered as the most, important greenhouse gas emission potential. But we also forget that there are other aspects of anthropogenic activities that actually causes greenhouse gas. Lots of them in agriculture, lots of them in the waste as well. And so if you aggregate and look at the pie charts that really delineates what the sources of greenhouse gas emission, you will find out that the energy part of it, which is basically talking about fossil, is not actually the majority. But there for us lies the opportunity. How do we, as a fossil fuel dependent economy, reimagine our future going forward? So, for example, if you look at what Europe is about to do in 2026, imposing, border adjustment mechanism, which is basically tax on emissions-heavy goods and services from this part of the world, then that means that even though we emit, we're in the minority, there's also some sort of requirement for us to adjust our emissions intensity by taking advantage of those, what we call the low-hanging fruits. So if you look at petroleum, for example, which is our biggest foreign exchange earning commodity, what happened to all the pyramids in Kano when we were younger? What happened to all the cocoa and the rubber? These things are still in need today. Why did we find oil and suddenly became very irresponsible with oil, and then everything else went to hell? We need to go back to basics. Agriculture will forever remain our mainstay. We all hear what's going on right now. Food prices are going up. Do you think you're going to tell somebody out there in the street to reduce their emissions when he's hungry? Let's come back to basics. Let's do for us what's most important for us, right? We will reduce our emissions intensity, and there are plans with the council and our government partners and institutions to begin to mainstream climate smart agriculture, reduce emissions intensity within the livestock, which is the part of the agricultural value chain that's most responsible for methane. As you know, methane is the biggest culprit in terms of greenhouse gas action. And rice cultivation is there, and of course landfills and waste. If you look at these low-hanging fruits that we have absolute control over, then we can begin to look at where what I like to call our low-hanging fruits lie, where we can redirect investments to make the biggest impact without over-dependence on that's loss and damage, or over-dependence on foreign inflows of financing to support that energy transition. But be as it may, there still needs to be some level of cooperation. The Article 6 of the Paris Agreement is predicated on global cooperation, right? What that means is that emissions generated at the back of my village in Anambra State will impact on someone in Korea, right? That means as a part of the Committee of Nations, we have to do our own part to reduce our intensity in order to be able to contribute to the overall global ambition to reduce our methane intensity by, I think it says 30 gigatons by the year 2050. And so we're participating in, so back to loss and damage. Loss and damage serves as a catalytic source of financing to look at things like adaptation, our ability to respond to extreme climate events, whether storms, flooding instance, coastal erosion, and then desertification in the north and droughts and all of that. But as a country, as a people, there are instruments available to us domestically to be able to amplify on those and prepare ourselves to participate without depending on loss and damage. It's still largely nominal until we see some real action. I think for us, let's keep looking at opportunities within our domestic economies to be able to finance what we're looking at. Lastly, before I yield, one such opportunity is the use of the carbon markets to finance some of these very important energy transition activities. Our low carbon transition is predicated on our ability to find financing to do what we need to do. Again, climate smart agriculture continues to be a priority for us. And reducing emissions intensity in our upstream, mid and downstream of the oil and gas sector is important. But that sector is largely self-governing because they have the wherewithal to do that. Last week, Total Energies had indicated that they have completed their flare down on the routine flares, that is routine flares, not safety flares and fugitive venting, on all the operations in Nigeria. Shell, Chevron, everyone is on target. Our domestic operators are also keen into that as well. So there's a lot happening there. As Mr. President said in COP28, there's going to be a renewed focus on methane abatement. The journey to 1.5 crosses through the methane highway. We all know that. Climate 101 tells us that methane is the most potent of all greenhouse gases. Right? Carbon is there for hundreds of years, but methane causes 80 times more damage than carbon. So the focus on some of these low-hanging fruit becomes important in helping to meet our 2030, 2050, 2060 targets. Again, all of this ties back to what I was talking about loss and damage. The overdependence on that should not be our focus. let's focus on what do we do internally, domestically, to be able to find the required funding and catalytic finance to be able to do what we need to do. And the carbon markets present a very good opportunity. And we'll talk more about it. Emeka is looking at me now, like something like this. We're out of time. But I think this conversation is really important, and we look forward to engaging with you more on this.
Thank you, Michael. And you mentioned something around charity beginning at home, but dollars also $1 to 1,900 naira, right? So we need money from the outside world to start this journey.
That's why.
All right. All right. All right. So speaking of money coming in, Zainab, your organization just gave 2.5 million euros to support climate change. Now, and I know what Michael's saying about charity beginning at home. Will home per se, as Nigerian government, be able to dictate where that 2.5 million euros is spent to fight climate change, or would it be just some sort of a slush fund?
Okay, so a little clarity. The 2.5 million was a technical assistance to support BOI, Bank of Industry, to be able to strategize and also be able to sort of provide themselves support capacity, being able to identify 100% climate resilient projects, also climate mitigating projects. The entire fund given to BOI was $100 million in Nigeria for green financing, 100% green financing. So the 2.5 was strictly for technical assistance to support them. Sorry, your question was, would that be enough or would it be a slush fund? So this is where I would say, as someone who works in a place where we finance projects, the AFD, a lot of the agencies, well, let me speak for AFD, we don't dictate what the project is. It's just that because of Paris Agreement, we have to make sure the most important element is the sustainability and the sort of decarbonization of this projects. So that has to play a part, whether it's a water project, agricultural project, there has to be some climate and part of this project, components of it. So the question of slush fund is when implementation comes into play. There's only so much that can be done in terms of what the funder can do when the money is already with the Nigerian government. Now, we try to put things into place to make sure it is done properly, and we try to mitigate as much risk in just wastage. However, we all know that still happens. But I also don't think we can rely on these sorts of funds, because they're literally things we can do from a local perspective. Michael has mentioned it. We have to make sure that we look from our own ends, the little that we can do. It doesn't even have to be something so huge, but we were talking about this with Omono earlier on, just waste. When we're talking about climate impact, we're talking about floods, we're talking about emissions from burning waste, plastics, all of that. Even our actions. So our awareness, our education, our understanding of how we actually impact our own environment has to come from us first, because it doesn't matter if Lagos State is a great state to invest in because Lagos has, great returns or whatever the case may be. It's a question of, is this going to be able to actually be sustainable? If the people are not even aware of it, if it's not localized, if you don't bring people like Lucky, who are climate justice people, in the picture, the CSOs, the NGOs on a local level have to play their part. Otherwise, all we're doing is bringing more money, increasing Nigeria's debt as well, because nothing is free. These are all debts. They might be concessional loans, whatever the case may be, these are all debts. And then we don't implement them. We have stranded assets, white elephants, just, nothing complete. So unless from the local perspective, from the Nigerian perspective, we start you know, I mean, the awareness can start, you know, the government making sure people understand, which I know on a local level, people are actually going out of their ways to do this, but it needs to be done a lot better. And the truth is, we can also, if we are better at our own behavior and we improve our own standards, the truth is we will see opportunities in terms of climate smart agriculture, because for me, that is something I think when I was at GIZ was something I really worked on for quite a bit. And I saw, you know, how for us in agriculture, there was so much waste. In even the most subsistent farmer, they didn't have anywhere to store. They didn't have anywhere to process. They couldn't even transport, so logistics. And so they're low-hanging fruits that Nigeria, to be honest, can provide these things for our own people without us looking outside. We can do it on a community-based level. You have one huge solar-powered cold room. You have one huge processing center where all the farmers in that community can come and process, especially if we also decide like, okay, this area, one village, this is the crop we're producing mostly, so that, you know, we can improve people's economic standing and also improve Nigeria's revenue, in that sense of these people are making money, they can sustain themselves, they can also export, because if we have the community based, you can have town based, city based, state based, and then you can grow this without having to wait just for, you know, some fund that is going to really, you know, take ages for us to pay back, because at the end of the day, we're not building our economy. We're just collecting money. Infrastructure still isn't there. So I believe like there's a place to start. It's not that difficult because we really are, I don't want to say at the bottom, but we are suffering from it. We're suffering from floods, erosion, crops are dying. We're not doing anything to prevent them. So there are ways we can actually do things on our own level. And then we can access a lot of these funds without being worried about how this is going to be implemented. Will this be a waste, or will this just be another avenue for an organization, for a business to just get money and not provide or produce anything? So.
Very good point. Just a quick one, maybe to Lucky. This utopic society just mentioned of collaboration, of kumbaya, who will lead it? There's got to be someone that will organize people and really start this process. As a change champion and as a climate justice champion, what has been successful in other environments? Who has led these charges in other countries?
That's a very interesting question. You know, who will lead? Before Zainab said the people, the truth is, before I respond to that, we should, for those that have read the sixth assessment report of the IPCC, they told us before COP28 that we are not on track in meeting the 1.5 that was agreed at COP15 Copenhagen. So while we're having this 1.5 conversation, it's better to know that we're off track, but we can come back to the track if we yield to the demand of climate justice. So now to your question, who will lead it? I think from COP25 that I joined in Madrid, I have to be biased here. The civil society have really been on the faces of these global leaders who are leading the conversation. First disadvantage is the fact that for civil society, they all have observer status, no access to these rooms where the decisions are being made. So what you have is people like the likes of Greta, who would come up with placards and say, we're dying. In Egypt, in Sharm el-Sheikh, before Sharm el-Sheikh, Nigeria alone, we lost about over 600 persons from the flood that happened from August, September, October that we had. And civil society were the ones who had to put this, because I think COP28 was the first time I had access to enter the negotiation rooms. Yeah, from when I started my climate justice movement, and kudos to the government for the badge to give me access to that. But if civil society continue to have observer status badges and you don't have a way, of course, we know everything has a process. There are political procedures to these things. But who will lead it? I would agree with Zainab, the people. But the people also need to have, just like young people who have been calling and say, we need a space at the table. The people need a space at the table as well. We don't have that space yet. We don't have that table. We have our chairs to go to the table with, but we just need the space at the table to lead those conversations. And I think there are best practices we can learn from the government. Recently, from 2021, when we revised our indices, I saw for the first time, at my perspective now, for the first time, government being open to civil society and say, come, let us have your input into this document that we're going to be submitting to the UNFCCC. There are best practices we can copy from Kenya. Kenya has lots of policy frameworks that we can look at in terms of their own commitment. And I think the conversation going forward will look into that, how climate finance is trickling down from government to subnational level, why the conversation go. But the people, civil society would have to lead the conversation to make those government be on their toes. And we're beginning to see that from the first climate summit we had in Nairobi to the climate week where we had the Nairobi Declaration, civil society had the opportunity to contribute to that particular declaration, which also served as a guide for the African group of negotiators that they took to COP28. So we're beginning to see changes, but I think there are rooms for improvement. Thank you.
Yes, I'll come to you, Michael. So I kind of asked that question as a preempt to you, right? Because NCCC, that's your role, right? To lead this conversation on climate adaptation and a number of interesting things. So maybe as a baseline, could you educate the audience on what NCCC does and how you're going to help us meet this goal?
So just a quick clarification. NCCC is not leading society. So let me ask you this question. Before COP28, have you identified with any government institution whatsoever? I don't even know what civil society entity you belong to. Do you know that there's a civil society representation at the higher level of the National Council on Climate Change with the president? Who is the person? You don't sit where you sit and then expect that things are going to happen. So I agree with you. First of all, let me apologize for the difficulties you had. It shouldn't have happened. There are teething problems when you are starting up a new entity. And I think we are getting the process better. But I think we're expecting a lot more engagement from you. You know, and that's one of the things we're talking about. I can't tell you how many people, youth organizations showed up in our office just because it's COP28. They get badges, they get accreditation. After COP28, everybody goes quiet. That's not how to be the police of the people. But again, we're inviting you to please, let's close ranks and work. The role that you play is very, very important as a conscience of the people, as a watchdog. And I'd like to take this bilaterally with you and possibly, schedule, perhaps a meeting, and let's have a way of, closing this gap. It's a very important gap that's there, and we need to close it. But back to the question. So we just provide coordination and some kind of there has to be a body that does interaction between the country and the rest of the world. But everybody is invited. It's everybody's business. The women, children, people with disabilities, private sector, everyone is invited to participate, which is why we, as council, we don't have the bandwidth and the resources to do all the things that people are expecting us to do. But we're making gradual progress, and let me make this announcement, public service announcement on behalf of the Director General. Please, our doors are open. I have my colleague here who just walked in, and just in case you need any number, any email addresses, that lady in green and black, the very delectable Deli, please contact her. Really open to associate, to collaborate. We need all the people can get because we don't have all the answers. And the collaboration that we get from you helps us fill the gap that exists within the council. So the wisdom of the National Assembly in crafting the act that actually set up the council made sure that it wasn't domiciled in any particular ministry or departments, that it was sitting with Mr. President, meaning that the type of leadership required for the kind of climate action that we seek and deserve in this country needs to come from the very top, meaning that everybody else can be convened, everybody else can be mandated to do anything. If you see this, for example, with Ministry of Agriculture, it's going to take a shape and form of agriculture. Yes, agriculture is a large part of what we do under climate change, but then there is power, there's transportation, there's finance, there's energy, there's other people, and therefore the reason is take it away from one and then put it somewhere where everybody is represented. That was the real thought process behind the situation of the council with Mr. President as the chairman, vice president as the chairman, and they have all these different ministers, including women affairs, as members of that council. People with disabilities, they're represented. The youth is represented. The civil society is represented, and so forth and so on. So again, please work with us. We don't have all the answers. We need you to help us fill the gap where we are not very strong, so that we can lean on you, and together we can craft a very fit for purpose climate action for Nigeria.
Thank you. After this question, we'll go to the audience for some questions and comments. Michael, as we look at energy transition as the next big conversation that's already going on, there seems to be there was a bit of a backstep from what was accepted, right? Because we said clean transition, no fossil fuel, but we then went to gas as a transition for obvious reasons. How's that conversation going as far as using gas as a transition fuel, knowing that 70,000 megawatts of power is generated off grid with diesel and fuel generators? So from a point of view of transition, should we not focus on cleaning that 70,000 up and getting them on grid, as opposed to saying we want to do a total transition and now go directly to solar and wind and all the renewables?
This is a very This is a question that comes up very, very often. How we made the pivot from renewable energy to half fossil, if I may use that expression to describe gas. It all boils down again to just transition, using what you have to get what you want, to get to where you need to be. As a fossil fuel dependent economy, again, there are risks and there are advantages, or rather there are opportunities that we need to explore, to exploit. We are largely, based on the reserves, a gas country. That means that we have more abundance of gas than we have crude oil that produces the gasoline and the diesel and the DPK and the other kerosene that we use to power at least a whopping 90% of our energy systems, homes, transportation, and what have you. Now, we all know that diesel and gasoline are carbon intensive. When you burn 1 liter of gasoline, what you get is 2.3 kilograms of carbon dioxide. It's a standard, it's a very well-known methodology for calculating that. Now, for gas, it's significantly less. So as a matter of self-interest, economy of scale, do we want to borrow money to bring in PVs and other resources, wind turbines, blades, the goods and services required to make them work? Meanwhile, we say that dollar is 1,900. So you want to take that dollar, give it back to the woman, bring his thing, put it down here, all in the name of just transition. We're not going to do that now. We have gas right under our feet. Exploit that gas, and then, like you said, clean the gas up, provide the tools and resources to be able to clean up the emissions coming from gas, which is basically the conversation we're having with them, including the diesel and the gasolines, right? So let's exploit gas, but the disadvantage we have currently with gas is that the infrastructure to deliver gas to the last mile largely doesn't exist today. But there are plans to put that infrastructure in place, and we're incentivizing the private sector to take a lead on that, providing gas tanks, pipelines, and what have you. There's a company called Accela in Lagos that's basically building out gas infrastructure in industrial clusters around Agbara, around Lagos, Apapa, and now they're moving into Ekpe. They're servicing Togo, now they're moving into Ghana as well with Nigerian gas. They have acreages and acreages of gas supplies and pipelines that are on the assets. So when we have more and more of this coming up, then we have an opportunity to really deliver gas to the last mile, including LPGs and the cylinders to drive them, to take them to Mama Nkechi, who is frying akara by the roadside, instead of cutting down wood and charcoal. And of course, we all know both the climate and the health challenges on the disadvantage of using wood fuels. The particulate matter, especially those of the 2.5 micron variety, they are not visible to the naked eye, but you can breathe them in and they go settle in your lungs day in, day out, and you have a baby trout behind you and you're cooking there. That picture just really keeps me awake at night. So back to your question. The investment in gas infrastructure really becomes an important pivot we have to make to deliver gas to the last mile. We have a lot of companies now switching out from diesel generators to gas generators. And guess what they're doing? They are monetizing the emissions reduction as part of that to be able to de-risk the investments there that they're putting it into converting from diesel to gas. Because you have to build the pipelines, you have to convert the turbines from one to the other. We have a lot of our power companies who are now going from single cycle to combined cycle turbines, which are anywhere between 35 to 50% more efficient per scoop of gas, right? To deliver the same power, but 50% to 35 to 50% more efficiently for the same volume of gas. So these are some of the little pockets of work going on around the country to close this gap and really make us truly a gas economy, because for us, that's our low-hanging fruit. The decade of gas idea is there, working in the background. One thing I do know is that perhaps they could be slow because the wheels of bureaucracy turns with a little bit of baby steps, but it's steady and it's sure. There is a direct correlation between our economic benefit as a country and the use of resources available to us. I can't see a situation where we are spending dollars after dollars that we don't have to bring in PVs and turbines and wind blades for something that we could potentially find an alternative for that gives us an economic advantage. Homegrown, locally developed, and delivers on the same promise. At the end of the day, we are only lucky. We're actually not up to 5%. We're only about 4%. Contributor to the whole emissions. Therefore, moving from moving from diesel and gasoline to gas is not such a bad idea at the end of the day, because finally we're going to have to pay for it. Zainab have been eloquent about it. It's all debt. How much debt can you accumulate for our grandchildren? So we have to balance climate with common sense for what makes sense for us as a country.
Excellent. All right, so let's go to the audience for some questions. If you have a question, please raise your hand. I'm sure there are questions online as well. There's one in the back. Let's get a microphone over to the gentleman. There's a second one in the back as well. It's coming back to you. All right, so there's two in the back, and then there's a lady here and David here. So that's 4.
Yeah, good evening, everyone. My name is Oluwatobi Ogunbayo. I just saw a friend of mine. We're in the same industry. I'm in the agri sector, and I, play a significant role in that sector. Agri is trying to mechanize. We're trying to move from the hose and the cutlass to heavy equipment like bulldozers to go into industrial and commercial agriculture. And this cannot be powered by renewables. A 325 horsepower, tractor or excavator, to commercialize agriculture can never be powered by renewables, not even gas. So what are the options on the table? That's one. I just want to be sure that we are really serious about climate change. I've been to a part of the world where some of these turbines are powered by diesel engines, very powerful diesel engine, somewhere in Europe where we all know. So I think this issue of climate change, we need to seriously address these concerns and stop playing lip service to it. Thank you very much.
Interesting. All right, next person. Yeah.
My name is Benjamin Aduli. I work with Mechanized Agricultural Investments and Services Limited. I am at a crossroad here. If we need to grow the food we need to massively mechanize our agriculture. The shortfall of the mechanization we need is in excess of 380,000 tractors needed every year. And what I hear you say is we need to go renewable energy. Like my colleague mentioned, that cannot power tractor. It can't. So we need to ask ourselves really, what is our priority? I think climate change is a problem of the Western world, not our problem. I honestly think so. Shouldn't we focus on our own problem and leave the problem for them? Thank you.
Very interesting. All right, let's get him better.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Rinred.
Quiet down.
I'm from Mayana Energy. Okay, so just Sorry, my name is Rinred Best. I'm from Mayana Energy. I have a question for Zainab. You mentioned when you're funding projects, you try to see the sustainability. So I just want to know, do you have a team to ensure, how do you ensure that these organizations measure their sustainability through their sustainability reporting? Because when we say we want to keep it at 1.5 degrees, I think it's very important for us as a country to now give ourselves like a benchmark, even though the world has given their own benchmark, but we have to see what is realistic for us. So how are you ensuring that how are you measuring this impact? Because it's very important when you're transitioning for the local person, how do they understand transition? So I want to just know how you're doing that, like how that will determine the funding of the project. Okay, so back to the gas aspect where that's Mr. Sorry, Michael, right? Yes. Okay, so I agree with you because I myself also like I'm very interested in the natural gas topic and all of that. So like you said, we need to look internally. To be honest with you, realistically, we have to rely on our natural gas resources to transition us because Africa needs industrialization for us to get to that point of development. But however, if you look at the natural gas case in Nigeria, like the AKK pipeline, it has stalled for too long. And okay, and then the recent coup that has taken place where you can see Burkina Faso, Niger, and Mali, they've now pulled out of the ECOWAS, which will affect the Trans-Saharan gas pipeline. So we're now back to the Nigeria-Morocco gas pipeline. But however, still that one is quite, because if it's going to take us 25 years, by projection, that's what they're projecting to build that pipeline. But then by then, when it's done, the EU will not need our gas because by then their demand for natural gas will start to decline. How do you think that Nigeria can step up now? Even though I saw that there was a recent, they went to fast track the discussion so that they can find the funding to begin that project. But is it feasible for us to actually finish that project within that period of time and then take advantage of being competitive in the European markets? Thank you.
Thanks. All right, we have, okay.
Sorry, to add to what my friend Winred said, sorry, I'm Celia Aku. And to add to what Winred said, and this also goes to Zainab. So you give funding to people to mitigate things, mitigate things like erosion and things that have to do with the climate. So you made a very good point whereby you said that the problem is from the grassroots. And we know that, yes, people can get this money and tell you that they control erosion because my sister works with NewMap, and I know part of what they do is erosion control. So my question here is, if you give these people this funding, is there a body or a department under your organization that monitors what these people do? And if yes, shouldn't they like have a way to tell these people we're all Nigerians, we have the interest of Nigeria at heart? So shouldn't there be a body or some people who tell these people you have to go down to the grassroots and educate the masses? Because even if we control this erosion, there are some things that lead to erosion, like throwing of plastics and stuff like that. Educate the masses from the grassroots. So I think there should be a body to monitor that and make sure that whoever gets this grant does the needful.
Thank you. There's one more question there. David?
Question is to Lucky. That is my first question. Yes, you talk so much about the negotiators, and from my experience, most people that go into the room to negotiate, you people focus more on one aspect of the sustainability, which is the environmental side. And if you talk about sustainability, you have to factor three things: the environment, the social, and then the economic side of it. Now, most of negotiators, like I said, you would say, oh, cut down emissions, and it's been there. How much are you doing to ensure that, okay, as we are cutting down this emission, it does not affect the social and the economic side of it? That is my question to you. And to Mr. Michael, in the fight to the climate justice or keeping at 1.5, there are a lot of trade-offs that come in between. They talked about it already. When you want to transition to renewable energy to cut down emissions, while this is good environmentally, economically, it does not favor a lot of industries. In Nigeria, if you look at the levelized cost of energy, we just published a research on that at next year. You may check it out. For solar PV, it's about ×6 higher than the LCOE for the light that we get from the national grid. how do you encourage, or how would you tell an average person to move away from what they can get the profit to what? And the net present value for solar PV currently for industry, for some companies or most companies, is negative. So if they run on this, they may hardly get any profit. So how do you balance these trade-offs in between? Thank you.
Thanks. So let's maybe start with the lady to take responses from the questions posed to her. We'll come to you.
So when apologies, I've forgotten the name of the first lady that asked me a question about measuring transitional emissions, you said. So first, a little bit of clarity. Most of my financing work has to do with public sector financing. So not just providing for energy sector. So like we provide finance for distribution and transmission grid to TCN to develop. We also provide financing to maybe REA to do sort of community-based solar PV project or grid-connected project. It's public sector financing, meaning the federal government has to be willing to take on this debt, usually blended financing, to be able to finance infrastructure. It is very important that we are developing our infrastructure. Now, when I say we're measuring, I don't mean that we're going like, oh, this is just 2,000 metric tons of carbon just to this one project. It's or this one section. It is calculated by, we do have a climate team that does this calculation. I really hope I'm getting your question right, but we do have a climate team that, based on the size of the project, even the cost of the project, there's a whole calculation they do based on this project, which they have Mr. Michael is very good with talking about GHG emissions calculations, but like there are methods that these things are used to calculate. Now, for us to be sure, it's every process. How when we finance these projects, we don't dictate this is what you need to do. The federal government, like let's say TCN has a transmission, recovery, a rehabilitation and expansion plan. We feed off that and we tell TCN, can we get a project proposal based on Northern Corridor or Abuja Ring or something, a transition plan they have? And then we sit down with them, with also our experts, and talk about, we need to make sure that this is implemented in such a way that it is climate compliant. This is not to take away from the project itself, because it's about infrastructure. You need to make sure you do it well. We need to make sure it is completed, which is another issue completely. This is more about governance, which I can't go into, but it's just that when we talk about when you do a transmission project, you're decarbonizing and increasing the generation, the source of generation from like, what's it called? Hydropower, which is cleaner than gas. But the truth is, we are not trying to tell Nigeria, or the AFD is not like, don't use gas. It's just, okay, let's improve the grid. Because if the grid works properly, people now have access to electricity from the grid and will not rely on their generators. Then you can now displace generator sets. You can calculate the emissions displaced just by displacing generator sets or reducing the use of generators. So these are like different ways. Even sometimes they talk about supply chain, how these things come into Nigeria. It's not a focus simply because it's really about getting the work done and then we can progress from there. But it's just about, let us displace the use of generators as much as possible by improving the stability of the grid, rehabilitating, expanding, whatever the case may be. That's sort of where we look at our projects. And like I said, I only do, public sector finance or infrastructure projects. These are the ones I do, which are very difficult to implement because working with government agencies. And I was one of them, so I know. I hope this answers your question a little bit. Thank you. And then the other one was about, pardon me. Sorry, could you tell me what I have everybody else's question. I wrote it down. Okay, about stakeholder activity and how we're sure like projects are implemented and all of that. So when we talk about financing mitigation projects, like, okay, the BOI fund, that is about 100 million is for projects. 2.5 is technical assistance so that they're able to identify actual climate mitigating or resilient projects. They cannot just make that decision. There are experts that work with them. It's also with the community. So there are stakeholders involved in on all of these things. So even if like a project developer comes and says, we have this project we're trying to finance, or a community says, we have a project we want to finance, well, it has to go through all of the criteria to make sure it is actually, especially resilient. We do not do resilient projects. I'm sorry. We're mostly doing mitigation projects. We need to do more resilient projects because mitigation is about, really in Nigeria, is about providing access, but mitigation is how are we going to stop what has already happened? How are we going to stop it from impacting in the future? When we talk about the fact that, you know, crops are dying or there's no water or drought, then we have to talk about, okay, how can we harvest water when it rains in certain areas and store it somewhere else? When we talk about, okay, we don't have enough land, we can talk about crop, what's it called? Agroforestry, right? Where you now plant both crops, what's it called? Cash crops, as well as food crops, as well as in the forest, and you also rotate those. So there are various things we can do in Nigeria which can prevent the impacts right now. We're talking about floods, we're talking about sea levels, especially in the south and the north central. We're talking about, and we don't have sea walls or river walls to protect people, and homes are being destroyed. People have to leave their communities and move somewhere else and start all over again. Also, their farmlands are being destroyed. So these projects have to follow a certain criteria to make sure they're actually solving a problem. And the community is part of the feedback. So there's a yearly feedback that goes on. What is happening? What has happened? If they have an issue, they actually know who to go to, because the truth is BOI are off lending it, but it's also like communities can get this money. Private sector has access to it. Banks have access to it as well. If they have like a pipeline of projects they're trying to finance, but they still have to follow a certain criteria of 100%. I don't like to say 100% climate mitigating project, but just the project in place, maybe not necessarily how it comes into Nigeria or whatever the tools or raw materials, but that project, especially with adaptation, has to fully be like, we are solving an existing problem, not necessarily like, okay, this is a future problem right now, this is the problem, this is the issue, erosion, like you mentioned. So this is how we ensure they're being done, we ensure that it's complete, because there is constant like community meetings to be sure like these things, and they know from the beginning, they have to be reached out to, this is what we're doing. But that's, yeah, I hope that answers your question a little. We can talk later if you have any more questions.
Thanks, Zainab. So Michael, the second person that asked a question said climate change is an Igbo issue. What are your thoughts?
Yes, so we hear this a lot, and I think there's reason for skepticism, and again, part of that is also how we as the people have responded to climate issues. And to the question about not being able to power mechanized equipment with renewable, that was true 2 years ago, not anymore. Have you heard about hydrogen? Okay, and so as a matter of fact, we've received requests from a particular entity looking to convert Dangote trucks from diesel to a less carbon intensive alternative. And of course, gas is still there largely present. And sorry, when you finish, let us know. Right. So so the premise that's we have to continue powering our tractors and combined harvesters with diesel and gasoline is simply not the case anymore. R&D and improvements in science and technology have actually enabled alternative low carbon fuels for heavy equipment. That's one. Two, the fact that climate is an Igbo problem I can sympathize with you why you would think so. And after all, largely, they were the ones responsible for where we are today. But Climate Science 101 tells us that the climate does not have a barrier. So what they do there will continue to affect you here. And if you say that global cooperation is at the heart of climate change action, then you have to do your small part. And that small part will include what you do domestically to transition away from those emission-intensive or anthropogenic type of activities and operations to low carbon alternatives. But like we've discussed earlier here, let's do it in a way that is consistent with our economic and national security interests, right? The idea of borrowing money to buy tons and tons of PVs for transition, it doesn't make sense. Let us harness that gas. Let us invest in enabling those gas infrastructure that delivers to the last mile. So the gentleman asked why it's not possible it doesn't make economic sense to transition to renewables. But that's not what we're saying. We're saying renewables are there, so you have an energy mix, right? And the energy mix is really the conversation here, not a wholesale transition from fossil to renewables. It's just not practical. I mean, even just from the point of common sense. So we're saying there are certain sort of activities that lend themselves to renewable energy, while others, and largely the majority of them, will still largely be powered by gas that we have available. All we're saying is let's just repurpose some of the income from subsidy removal to building that gas infrastructure. The Presidential Gas Initiative really speaks to some of the things we're talking about, building hubs across the country to be able to refuel our transportation corridors. Yes, transport corridors from Lagos to Kano, from Maiduguri to Port Harcourt. So when you have that infrastructure in place, then it becomes a lot easier to really manage. A lot of our IPPs are now largely being driven by gas. And so it becomes cheaper, to your point, I can't say the gentleman again, to connect to the grid that is powered by gas than to connect to one that's powered by perhaps maybe renewable or even diesel. It's just not the sensible thing to do. So there's got to be an energy mix. And I think that's the real message here. A mix of one and the other, to really have an opportunity for us to transition from one to the other. We can't continue as business as usual. There is what you call in international diplomacy. I forgot it. I'm sure my professor is going to flog me, but I forgot what that expression is. But when you're dealing with your partner nations, there are certain protocols that you must adhere to. And that is one thing that the Paris Agreement has really outlined, and you must do your part. That is why we submit our NDCs periodically to the UNFCCC, say this is what we're committing to. 20% we will do by ourselves. Additional 27% we will do if we have help coming from outside. But the low-hanging fruit for us is focus on that 20% that we can do within the means domestically, that we can generate domestically. That's really the message here. Not wholesale move to renewable, but transition in an orderly manner that makes sense for everybody. I think there's a question about the geopolitics of the gas business, the AKK, the Trans-Sahara, and I think that's parts of the whole business that we haven't quite gotten a handle on. The energy supply chain is still largely controlled by geopolitics. Look at what's happening in the Suez. The Houthi rebels are shooting down at vessels crossing the Suez Canal from one part of the shipping lane to the other. And that's causing a huge gridlock. Goods are not able to move. So what happens is it causes scarcity on this side of the shipping lane. And then you can't move the corresponding goods on the other side of the shipping lane because of some group in Yemen is causing trouble on that shipping lane. Think about the same thing. Let's extrapolate that to the West African situation where we have Al-Shabaab and all of these insurgency happening, and the withdrawal of Mali and Niger and Burkina Faso from the ECOWAS coalition. Geopolitics largely influences energy choices and mix. Look at what happened with Ukraine. Europe really had to go start firing back their power, their coal plants because they interrupted the gas supply on what they call the Nord Stream connection from Russia down. And so, yes, those will be there. But that, again, represents an opportunity for us. Let us pivot back to looking at our domestic obligations and see how we can maximize that.
Thank you, Michael. Lucky, over to you. There was a couple questions.
Yes, thank you very much. I can't remember your name, but that's a very interesting question. But let me also put out a disclaimer that I am not one of the negotiators for government, because the question also focused on what happens at the negotiation room. I was supported by government with a badge, allows me into the negotiation rooms. We do have, I think Mr. Michael will speak to that as well. We do have those who are technical experts as well, who represent the interests of Nigeria at the negotiation rooms. And also it has to align at the African group of negotiators because we go as a bloc. Mr. Mike has also given a little explanation on how the geopolitics works. And at the negotiation rooms, it's all about interest. And Mr. Mike also had said that it's 4% and not 5%. Well, this also speaks to the gap in R&D that we currently have. The conversation of 4% has been for a long time, in the last 10 years. The population is growing. We cannot continually say we emit less than 4%. Africa is emitting more, maybe 4.5, 4.8 to 5% or more. But to your question on how do we balance the social and economic side of things in the negotiation rooms, it boils down to interests. For Africa, one of our interests in the last 6 years has been for parties to consider Africa as a continent of special needs and circumstances. Heading to COP28, one of our needs was the doubling of adaptation finance. We've listened to Zainab here say they are more concerned about financing mitigation project. And you would blame them, of course, because they are investors. They need to get return on investment. They also believe that when you channel investment toward adaptation, you get little or no return on investment. But if you begin to look at current studies and research now, one good example would be the principles of locally led adaptation. You would see that there are areas where you could channel investment into adaptation and then you start seeing return. Those are conversations that we might have with Zainab or those who are interested after now. But to respond to your questions at the negotiation rooms, be it if you're coming as the AGN or G77 and China or the OASIS or the EU, UK as they come to balance their interests. And one of the interests will be the interest of social and economic balance. So there are ways to balance that. And I think this will be a call to as many young people who are in the hall to start expressing interest. There are trainings on understanding the geopolitics of the global climate conversation. There are also training that takes you through how negotiations are being made. I'm happy to share some of those links to as many persons who are interested. But the point is, we go into the negotiation rooms with interest and everybody comes out with their own reflections if the negotiations were a win or a loss, as the case may be. But for Africa, I think the L&D fund is a win for us now. Thank you.
Thanks, Lucky. All right, let's have another round of questions. I know there's one here at the front row. There's one here, and another one here. So there's 4 people.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Mercy Hamuchi from NERC. I have 2 questions. One is for Zainab and the other is for Michael. For Zainab, my question is, how do funding agencies show prudent use of resources for, climate action? Because all I heard you say is that when there is a need or people indicate interest of investments they need to do in the network, probably transmission or distribution, like you mentioned, you advance some money for that. So I want to know if there is like a particular way or a department, whatever, with funding organizations, probably yours in particular with AFDES that handles that prudency issues. Because I mean, we've heard in the last couple of months, not just couple of months, ever since, we always hear about millions of dollars being sunk into, investment projects, and yet there's no evident improvement, or there is little evident improvement or evidence to show for that. Yes. And to Michael, my question is, so here in this room, you have said a lot of very high level things and conversations that need to happen at decision tables and all of that. And I'm wondering, like you mentioned, climate change is everybody's business, right? So is there anything, is NCCC partnering with certain organizations to drive down this climate change conversations to the grassroots? Because at the end of the day, some people need to hold. You might not have people from up there holding the leaders accountable, right? It has to be at some point, people from the grassroots would need to organize themselves and hold people accountable, hold themselves accountable, as it were. So my question is NCCC doing anything around around grassroots engagements, to drive the message of climate action and all of that down to the common man? Thank you.
Thank you, Mercy. There's a question here, and then we'll come to the 2 over here.
Okay, during the COP28, COP28 year, I saw that there were discussions on.
Please introduce yourself.
Okay, my name is Feishayo Ali. Yeah, I work with Avon Hill Synergy. During the COP28, I saw there were discussions or conclusions on tripling renewable energy and doubling energy efficiency. So for the renewable energy part, I just want to find out the plans or strategies for what's it called? Sorry, I'm trying to remember my question. Management of the equipments and like recycling strategies for those equipments, because basically there are going to be a lot of implementations on renewable energy. Are there maintenance strategies, maintenance structures for those equipments over time? Are there management strategies to actually preserve those equipments, or at the end of the day, are we just going to end up burning these equipments? Because it's almost as if we are going back to square one, because I mean, these equipments have lifespans. They have, times when they won't be able to be used anymore. Then for the energy efficiency parts, I want to find out the strategies or the plans concerning energy efficiency. I don't think we've talked about it yet. So I just want to find out the plans as to energy efficiency. If there are anything they are putting in place for energy efficiency. Thank you.
Thank you. We've got 2 more on this side.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Hassan Al Hassan, research student in Cranfield University, United Kingdom. I'm presently collecting my data for my research, which is energy policy implementation, the case of Nigeria. Actually, there is a lot of challenges that I am presently witnessing. Just yesterday, I was in some rural here in Abuja, where there are some mini grids being run for about 3 years. The communities, 2 communities I went were very happy with the mini grid projects, but on my digging down to get data from them, there is a lot of problem. The challenges is the productive use of energy, appliances and equipments are not there. So in one of the places, 90% of those that are connected to the mini grid are residential loads, and those loads are very, very minute. That if the developer is to depend on those loads for his payback period, I doubt if those projects will be sustainable. And I'm a researcher on policy, particularly policy implementation in renewable energy in rural Nigeria. The Nigerian energy policy stipulated that the rural and peri-urban communities should be powered with, as much as practically possible, with renewable energy. But those people are not, most of them are not using this infrastructure, let's say the mini grids, for productive use. Many of those people are farmers, fisheries, and along the agri value chain. Zainab, you are an investor. How much has been invested from your organization, AFD, I think, in the productive use of energy, appliances, and equipments? For instance, a keke rider in Gwagwalada will be very happy and will make more money if he has an EV keke that he will charge, because there is a mini grid in his village. He will use that keke, that mini grid, charge his keke during the night, take it to Gwagwalada and make his days without impacting the climate. He will not release any carbon. And those that are farmers, because I have a discussion with them, those that are farmers will love to have farm implements that are solar powered or renewable energy powered. I wanted to know if you have any of those projects that is being funded by you. Thank you.
Interesting. All right. Hakeem?
Good evening. My name is Hakeem. I'm the MD of A Solar. So I'm going to write off from where he started. I think we are the largest rural electrification company that is local. I have about 130,000 connections in rural areas. And I will not invest in mini grids in rural areas because of concentration risk, because of productive use. So let us go back a little bit. I'm very active with government. I hardly come to the symposium, but today my office is just down the road, so I thought maybe I'll just share some information with you guys. So we've borrowed over $10 million locally, but we only do solar home systems. Because the conversation you're having, you're not asking the science question. You're not asking the human behavior question. What you're doing is projecting concepts that are foreign. If you have a guy in the village that has never had light, and you brought a 30 kilowatt mini grid, he can only have light bulb and charge his phone because he doesn't have a history of a television, of a fan, of a TV, of an AC, of a freezer. But the wise men at the top will say, go and put a mini grid in the village. Instead of them to ask, in this cluster of villages, where is the production center where they grind maize or they grind cassava? And I put the mini grid in that location. But when I give the farmer a solar home system, it comes with a TV, it comes with a fan, it comes with a radio, It comes with torchlight. It comes with phone charging, which is the human energy consumption pattern. So you should plan from energy consumption as opposed to policy. So first thing, when you want to make the policy, solar home systems should be for rural homes energy consumption. In the world today, this is the technology that the World Bank and all the international organizations recognize as the transition technology. This is downstream solar. So the people in the room should not get confused about that. There's a concentration risk of $250,000 investment in a mini grid, and then there's a $250 investment in a solar home system. So I shouldn't need to be an economist to tell you today that instead of me running wire between village homes that are sparsely distributed, which automatically means I will spend more money on connection, I can just put a 250-watt panel on top of each person's house. Every 30 days, it pays me from his mobile phone. That's just logic. But if we sit in Nigeria, I went to COP. I never went to any of the sessions because they want us to sit and have illogical conversations about capital allocation. So the problem in the sector is not money. I can tell you that lot. We had $250 million of NEP for those of you that are in the industry, and it's going to increase to $750 million called DARES for those of you that are in the industry. So any young person here that wants to invest, you need to look at specific, the technologies that can attract carbon credit. You talk about desertification and environmental. The only technology is solar water pump. There's no other technology you can invent. If there's desertification or dry season farming, you need irrigation. So if you need irrigation, there's only one technology for irrigation. The Europeans solved this problem 200 years ago. We are here trying to debate what it means to do dry season farming in a sustainable way. Only two technologies, irrigation, after that, either cooling or processing. So for those at the policy level, invest in science that solves these specific problems. Don't come here and assume that there's a young person that is going to invent any new invention. There's no new invention. It's like, I want to buy I better pass my neighbor gen. It's either 1 kVA or 5 kVA or 10 kVA. I know it's a generator. The technology substitute for I better pass my neighbor gen is solar home system. So why not just replace technology? Then Madam's issue in the development bank is simple. You go to REA and tell them, I want to connect 1 million Nigerians in these technologies. I've never taken grants. I personally think it's a waste of time. Why should we write business proposal to a foreigner about my potential business in my country? I don't understand it. For those of you that apply, I can certainly tell you there's no one that has grown significantly. So, what I'm asking today, the market is as big as MTN. So my distribution channel as a company is POS agents and mobile banks. That's it. Because in the village, they all have mobile phone. They can't charge it. So that's your market. So let's stop wasting the time. I thought I would come today because he's my good friend. And I like the skeptic thing going. We borrow money at, don't be scared. Borrow your money, go and do your business. If you buy it at 100 naira, sell it at 150, make your margin. NCCC, we are happy when we heard the announcement in Dubai, but we don't know yet whether we'll interact with you because we don't interact with REA either. Okay. If they are here, they can stand up. Why? Because of too much English. Yeah, it's very simple. I was one of the first people to have the NEP. And we have been doing this business. What we need to change is the conversation from the business being a charity business to being a profitable business. It's simple.
Great.
Okay. So if I was to say my suggestion, there are many banks that want to lend people money. Local commercial banks, if you have your business model right. Mini grids, I would encourage the government to go to productive use, like he said, because if you take mini grid to villages, they don't have TVs. They can't consume the energy. So you will not make money. Husk, I know you are in the village. That's the problem you are solving. Husk Energy, they are here. Like, I have a mini grid in Kaida. I brought Tesla batteries. Yeah, in Kaida here, I have a mini grid, 250 homes. Sir, their total consumption is 11% of consumption.
What a waste of money.
Do you understand what I mean?
Standing
Now
waste of
I'm
money.
taking electric motorcycle to those places to swap their motorcycles so that my charge station is now the #1 transport business in the place. But I had to spend the money first to learn this lesson. And I think nobody should go this route so they don't lose money as well. So mine is not really a question. I'm just saying what you're doing is fantastic, but you must have in the room when you are going to that table, business people that are private sector that can take risk. If you don't have somebody in the room that can take $1 billion risk, why are you in the room? When one white man wants to give you $1 billion, then you are not in the room. You are just there to follow a process.
Thank you, Hakeem.
That's all.
Thank you, thank you. All right, so we need to come back up here to get some quick responses. Let's go here first, and then we'll come to you if there's time. Michael.
So how does NCC plan to mainstream climate change in the grassroots? So if you look at the structure of the council, we have the chairman of the Governors Forum as a member. We have the president of the Association of Local Governments as a member. We have state directors and regional directors. Because I can't imagine sitting here in Abuja and superintending what's happening in Taraba State. That's impossible. And part of that interaction is to have the subnational participation in the council so that it can get to the grassroots. And we are actively using the capacities within the CSOs and the NGOs as well to be able to reach the people, creating jingles and messages in those local languages that gets to them, meets the people at their point of need. I want to say something here. The council, people don't recognize the council is just barely a year old. The act was established in 2021, November rather, and it was the council was inaugurated in September 2022, but it was only operationalized in February of 2023. But I'm not making excuses, but what I'm saying to you is there's a lot of room for growth, and the interaction between the federal entities and the subnationals really becomes important because, as you know, climate change is a global conundrum. Climate action is what? Local. And therefore, it's important for us that synergy becomes really seamless. And so that process is ongoing, and we're taking advantage of that institutional arrangement to be able to reach to people. I think overall, the conversation we had from the gentleman from A Solar and the question asked by the other gentleman about what are the strategies for managing the waste, the lady arising from renewable energy, life cycle and end of life management for such equipment. That's very apt. So it goes back again to one, enabling environment, and two, regulation that enforces certain behaviors that handles end of life for equipment and tools that actually have renewable, that used to be renewable, they used to provide renewable power, whether they're solar PVs or whether the controllers that come with them, or some of the mercury equipment that's inside the wind turbines themselves. So thankfully, there are evolving regulations right now that will speak to those. So yes, so there's a plan. There's a current regulation by the Federal Ministry of Environment that talks about the electronic recyclable electronic products, especially those that come out of cellular phones, televisions, and some of those, of course, renewable energy equipment. The gentleman from Solar really made some very important points, and I am in complete alignment with you. But one thing I need to push back at you, there's a tendency for you people to overfocus on government. Government is only an enabler. You, as a private sector individual, came up with these very innovative ideas on how to sell your products, how to package it to make it palatable and easy for mom and pop shops and homes to adopt. And that's where the private sector really excelled. Look at Tesla. We just mentioned it was Tesla batteries. It's Tesla. It's not a government institution. It just came up with a project that gave government impetus that now cashed out on the IRA. So what we're saying to you is bring the projects forward. No, quite frankly, bring the projects forward. I want to have this conversation with you. I really want to close ranks with you because one thing I should also say is that I'm not Ministry of Power, REA. So the expectation I'm going to solve all your problems is not there, but I like to take the message back to them. So when you have renewable energy projects, solar projects, wind projects in places that don't have, productive use, like you said, someone somewhere made that decision without this consideration. Let me chuck it up to you in experience back in the early days of solar adoption. Right now, we're getting smarter about it. And I think Zainab, in her time at GIZ, during the NESP and all of that, have witnessed the transition from really moving away from putting solar for solar's sake in some places where you don't have enough, economic activities to support its maintenance and sustainability. But now things are happening rather differently. We're looking at distributed energy resources, where you have individual homes serving as a mini substation for everybody else and get connected to a grid. Those kind of things are evolving. And in what you described, where there's a total package, you have this home solar system, you have the TV, you have the torchlights and everything. Those are marketing products, really. It's the same solar, but how you say in a packaging now. So how you package this thing and deliver it at the end of the day is what matters. That's not what government excels at. That is where we want you to come forward to help us with. So, but let me spend the next 30 seconds explaining to you what government has done. We are creating products that allows financial institutions to give very low interest loans to civil servants and individuals who are desirous of, powering their homes outside of the grid. And then what happens is that it's just a simple case of pay over time. So I want the 5 kVA system. I'm not going to plug down 7 million naira at the same time. Nobody has it. So the gentleman from Solar has a package. Pay from your cellular phone. By the way, I want to come and learn work from you. And so because these are how businesses are generated. That makes sense for the poor man on the streets. We have people who can afford to put 20 kVA without blinking, but that's not for everybody. A vast majority of Nigerians can't afford this. And these products and services that allows them to have some kind of arrangement with a solar provider like yourself and a financial institution backing them to have these things installed. And then over the next 2-3 years, pay gradually. And so these are some of the things that are really happening in the ecosystem. We have a couple of banks that have approached the council, but we're not a one-stop shop. There still has to be conversations with REA and Ministry of Power and some of the projects that are actually sponsoring these installations. And so we really welcome ideas. And we want to once again emphasize this. We don't have all the answers. We will never do. That is why it's a two-way traffic. We hear from you, we take the best of it, make it into a product, and together we can co-create something that works for everybody.
Excellent. Thank you, Michael. So we'll come to Zainab, maybe a couple minutes. Nah.
Okay, so thank you, Michael, though. You did cover a lot, so that helps to just, I believe the first question I got was regarding funding agencies. and basically how we make sure like the investments before we advance. So I mean, I could only give you like a short stint, but there's a whole process. It could take 2 to 3 years before this money is approved from the board of AFD. And this has to do with a lot of things. It has to do with environmental and social plans in place for projects, especially infrastructure projects that require maybe people have to be displaced, or even like the environment that is there. So there is a lot of steps to this. The board has to see the plan. The board has to see a certain amount of already sort of work in place to see that, okay, there is some seriousness. But I would still say we don't have capacity, number one. Number two, we have a problem of governance. Now I'm talking about public sector financing. Private sector is different. And the truth is, with private sector, it's very important for them to be able to pay back whatever loans they get, because it's about continuity, to be able to generate revenue, profit, whatever the case. But with public sector, it's a situation where it is government. They take the loan or the debt or whatever it is on behalf of the country, Ministry of Finance, on behalf of TCN, on behalf of REA, whatever the case may be. But there's a whole process before that money is made available. There are conditions that have to be met. And it's not just given to the government, it's in tranches. It's like, okay, this stage has been reached, we'll give this. However, I'm not saying we still don't have issues. We can see it. You know, we claim there are projects, but we don't see the so-called impact of these projects that are supposed to improve the economics, which is where I think when you talk about government, it is in the government's place to say, we don't want this money anymore because it is causing more harm than good. Because there's only so much someone can't just say, we're going to give you money and you must take it. You have to want to take it. So that's another problem that we have, is to take a step back and say, wait, what are we doing? What do we have in place? Should we even collect any more? Or should we sit back and really plan the strategy for whatever sector, for whatever it is we're trying to put in place? If we don't do that, it's going to be a problem. Now, I see my REA person is here, so I can't say anything about them. I think Barbara is here. Oh, my seat. Anyway, but at the same time, they have implemented these NEP projects, and there's also a learning that has come from it, which is where they're not going to put it in place for the DARAs, the new projects coming up, also all back funded and all of that. Hakeem is not a fan of grants and whatnot, but at the same time, this is where we are. Nobody's forcing it on anyone. You have to understand this, but I think it's also a problem for us in Nigeria. These grants encourage businesses to implement, or some of these business implement projects, and you can walk away from it without worrying about the long-term sustainability of the project, your revenue, because there is money that has already been made in a short time. So we have to consider how we borrow money in this country, not just because it's there, but there is a long-term implication that there are all these, there's all these funds swimming, and Nigeria is very attractive because there's a lot of work to be done. We also we're not a least developed country, so we have to pay back with interest. So it's not like countries that get grants, which, by the way, it still doesn't mean there are no implications, because there's always something you have to give. There's no such thing as free money. So in that respect, I would say it's just a situation of we as a country has to decide whether or not we want to collect some of these money, or we're going to find ways to make sure we have financing in some other way, bonds or pension schemes, and make sure we're able to finance local businesses to be able to implement these projects and return, and it remains an economically sustainable way for us to develop our country. Yeah, I don't know if there was a second question. I might have missed it.
Yeah, I think you got it.
Okay.
Thanks, Zainab. Lucky, let's come to you. You've got a minute.
Okay, thank you. Interesting question on the management of renewable energy. If you look at, once again, I would refer us to the Nairobi Declaration that came from the African Climate Summit. That declaration captured that around 600 million people on the continent do not have access to energy. We're in 2024, 6 years to the expiration of the SDGs. There is a goal on the SDG 7 that speaks to access to energy. And the conversation that we're having around renewable energy, unfortunately, to some Nigerians still look very foreign, expensive. Mr. Mike has always stressed that we don't have the money to continually import some of the PVs that we use. This speaks to the gap in research and development that we have in our country. I'll give you a practical example. Last year, of course, within this period, we all know people are complaining who opened the door to hell. The weather is hot and all. Our electricity is not stable. We know there's this dwindling, the dams are dried and all of that. So last year, I took the bold step to try and get solar energy at home. Between that time to this point, the prices had gone up. And we know our current reality, dollar is probably 1,700 now, if we're not mistaken. So that gap exists for access to electricity, renewable energy. Then Mr. Mike and the council would have answers to how we can bridge that gap. Our technical universities that we have, how many are supported by government to even take on some of the solar systems, solar panels we have. If you use probably 2-3 years, they're gone. You pack them, they become e-waste, and then they accumulate in. So how do we now start having build the capacity of our locals to understand? My auntie, who is somewhere in Cross River, one local government, might not be able to afford renewable energy in her home. So that question is very important, and we now need to start speaking to how we can reduce energy poverty that we currently have. First, energy democracy and energy poverty. Then there are a lot of recommendations from the Nairobi Declaration on how the renewable energy market is over $3 trillion. Africa have been able to access just about 2 or 3% of the $3 trillion. And we have 40% or over 40% of the renewable energy resources of the world. If we have all this, yet we don't have capacity to provide renewable energy, capacity to maintain renewable energy structures. I'm not going to speak for government because we have the REA and other stakeholders that are here. But there is need to build capacity, invest in research and development in the country. Then we can start addressing some of the questions we have in SDG 7 and all. Yeah.
Thank you, Lucky. So it's 7:56. We must finish by 8. And I wanted to bring this conversation home. Our topic is COP28, keeping the 1.5 commitment in Nigeria. So I'm going to come to each of you panelists for a 30-second comment on how we're doing and how we can do that going forward based on what we just discussed. Michael, let's start with you. 30 seconds in real time. Sir, we need to finish. We will, no. This is not how this works. It's not how this works, sir. Please, pardon me. Go ahead, 30 seconds.
Well, thank you very much. I think the outcome of the GST really speaks to some of the urgent things that we need to adopt, or things we need to do on the path to 1.5. Tripling uptake of renewable energy and doubling energy efficiency is really a matter of a homegrown solution, and that is really critical. Again, I underline this homegrown solution. Lucky was talking about the expression about who opened the gateway to hell. The heat is just unbearable, and with increasing temperature, you have increased insurgency and strife. And if you've been listening to what's happening around Kaduna, Taraba, and Plateau State, you see there's a sudden surge in insurgency and attacks on the communities. So what are we as a country going to do to meet our commitments? Our signatures to the Global Cooling Pledge, which incidentally I'm currently backstopping for the council, really requires us to implement some of the outcomes of the Montreal Protocol, incentivizing our institutions. You mentioned research, right? Somebody mentioned research and development to be able to fill in the gap that closes the existing gap between us and the global north, because we cannot continue to over depend on the importation of goods and services that enables all of these. Homegrown solution for me will focus on adaptation and mitigation solutions that addresses our problems, but also reduces our over dependence on foreign imports.
Excellent. Lucky, 30 seconds in real time.
Okay. On our path to meeting the 1.5, we have our own commitment to the convention, is the NDCs, and we told our conditional and unconditional commitment. It's just to look at that policy and then see how. Just recently, the government has carried out a validation on costing of our NDCs. We've seen what it would take for us to contribute our own quotas, knowing fully well that we are part of those who emit less. Those who emit more have more to do, but we would have to work within the confines of our own NDC commitment to the convention. And then what we also need to do is to open up collaborations. And I'm happy Mr. Mike spoke about the council being operationalized in February. The council is very robust. Members of the council, there's role for everybody to play, including civil society. When we see each and everyone's part in that particular policy, I think we'll play our own part to 1.5.
Excellent. Zainab, over to you.
So I think just I would like to say that Nigeria is actually in a unique position to be able to leverage its own its position in Africa, in ECOWAS, in West Africa, to be able to leverage some type of financing that will work for them. We also, to meet with this COP 1.5 degrees Celsius commitment, we need to invest. When I say renewable, we don't just mean solar, we also mean hydroelectric power. Remember, this is also renewable energy, which is something we also have. And there are areas in this country that could benefit from hydroelectric power as opposed to just solar. And there are areas in this country that will benefit from solar because it will take a long time for that infrastructure for gas to get to certain parts of the country. So we need to look at every area of this country and see what works on a local level, and make sure we also do our due diligence as a country, as private sector, as CSOs, as NGOs, as financial institutions, to make sure and to assess every project as for the area that it's supposed to feed into on a smaller scale than to feed into the larger scale of the country. For me, stakeholder engagement will inform. I mean, it was mentioned here time and again, because sometimes projects are done in silos, and then you realize the people who are supposed to be able to access and have positive impact, that's not what they want. They have other needs, or you could at least support them in finding a way to develop their not just their economy, but also improve their livelihood, improve their way of living, and bring them into sort of the century where we all are in, and not let them fall behind of development and growth in the country. So that's it for me.
Thank you so much. This has been a very spirited conversation. A round of applause for our panelists. Let me hand back over to the TH team to do a quick closing remark. Busayo.
Hello, everyone. Good evening. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. We really appreciate you spending your time with us. And I really enjoyed this conversation. I like how expressive everyone was, both the panelists. Thank you so much for your time and sharing from your wealth of knowledge with us. And guests and audience, we really say thank you to for joining us and expressing how you feel, because this is how we change. This is how we build our society. And just as a token of appreciation, we have like snacks at the back and drinks just for you to network and share contact. Please, we really want you to speak to one another, and collaboration is how we make changes happen, right? So please, let's do that. We wish you a safe journey back home. And we really want to apologize if you are not able to ask your question. We were working with time strictly, and we want everybody to be home in due time. Thank you so much. Good night, everyone.